Hey y'all, my name is Lorena Estrella, and I'm really excited to share with you all my thesis project, Youth Action Lab. So my thesis project starts with me and the identities that I hold as a first-generation Dominican American woman. And in Spanish, we have this expression, ni de aquí, ni de allá, meaning from neither here nor there. And so for me, that space of in-betweenness, of having to navigate two worlds, is really this search for belonging and home. And so in a lot of ways, this project has been a conversation that I've been wanting to have with other Dominican folks about who we are, where we come from, and who we want to become for future generations. And so it's been deeply personal and important in my own journey. And I also acknowledge that I bring a lot of educational privilege into this project as someone who's had access to higher education and who's had to navigate predominantly white institutions of learning. I think a lot about the ways that education has shaped me and my worldview, and how I can use education as a tool for liberation. And so my thesis project finds its home place in Washington Heights, or El Alto Manhattan. And it's a place where Dominicans have been making their homes, their families, their businesses since the late 60s. And so right now, Dominicans are one of the largest immigrant groups in New York City at over 1 million. And Washington Heights is that place. We can get our food, our music, our culture, our habichuela con dulce year round. And so it's a place that holds a lot of meaning for people of the Dominican diaspora. And Washington Heights is also the site of change and resistance. And so on the face of and at the forefront of gentrification and change, I am thinking still a lot about what it means to be preserving the history and telling the stories of Dominican folks through the experience of living in Washington Heights. And so my thesis project takes root through this question when I met Amber, who's a middle school teacher in the Heights, and we were like, yo, how do we talk to other students, other Dominicans about identity and where we come from? Because a lot of our students were having all these different experiences around ethnicity and nationality and kind of getting it jumbled. And so we thought, what a great opportunity to co-create something together with these young people and share from our perspective as two Dominicanas with different experiences. And so Wheels was my partner for this project. And so Wheels is a public school in the Heights that serves almost 900 students from grades K through 12, and it's predominantly Latinx, predominantly Dominican, and most of the students are receiving free or reduced lunch, which means that they are coming from lower income households. And so it's just really important to acknowledge that intersection around, race and ethnicity, but also class. And so thinking about how this intervention could really speak to that lived experience of the youth in the building. And so for me, grounding in Paulo Freire's work around pedagogy of the oppressed, it was important to think about the ways that education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom. And so really wanting to be on the side of freedom, right, through this project. And so in navigating a public school system in New York City, which is one of the largest in the country, we kept coming across the idea that, what made this really hard is that racism is at the core of why students aren't getting the representation that they need, right, or that they seek. And so, our public school system really privileges this and promotes this idea of whiteness as the norm that really others non-white students. And so we see racism show up in our Eurocentric curriculum, through a majority white teaching force, through racially segregated schools, which is based on a legacy of housing discrimination, overemphasis on standardized testing. So all these ways that we know that what's actually important in our schools is that we adhere to these ideals around middle-class whiteness. And so the research shows, right, so when young people are navigating these school systems, that they're experiencing racial discrimination and microaggressions, and all of those things lead to added stress, and that less than 10% of our school classroom time is devoted to Black history or non-white history. And so the impact for students of color is that when they don't see themselves represented in their school and in their learning, they're more likely to experience lower self-esteem, internalize negative stereotypes, and ultimately become disconnected from their education. And so Dr. Bettina Love, in her book, which I totally recommend, reminds us, right, that racism literally murders your spirit. Racism is traumatic because it is a loss of protection, safety, nurturance, and acceptance, all things children need to be educated. And so thinking about that and the ways that children have to navigate racist schools and their own racialized identities really brought me to my how might we question, which is how might we create a safe space for Latinx 8th graders to explore and cultivate a sense of agency and belonging in their racial and cultural identities. And so I spent a lot of time at Wheels talking to students one-on-one, in small groups, observing classrooms. And what I discovered is that young people were already navigating questions around identity on their own, and that they were having these questions, having these epiphanies, and kind of being left on their own to figure it out. And so young people want to explore and talk about who they are. They want to connect with their culture and learn about where they come from. And so when I was talking to students and learning that they didn't even know that there was slavery in the Dominican Republic, it really told me a lot about the ways that we're teaching world history, right? Like, we're missing a huge chunk about what slavery in the Caribbean really means and what it means for who they are and in relationship to this country in the US. And so for me, the things that emerged was that young people not only need, but they deserve safer spaces. They deserve the support of adults. They deserve ways to explore and affirm who they are, to connect with their history and their culture, that's really what schools should be doing for them. And this list here became my design criteria for the intervention. I really needed to think through all the ways that we could support students fully in how they were and how they show up in their schools, knowing that we were up against systems of racism that seek to dehumanize us on a daily basis. And so I came to this conclusion that when young people of color have the tools and the ability to know themselves and their history, they're better able to navigate and resist oppressive systems and move away from surviving to thriving. And so here comes Youth Action Lab. And so Youth Action Lab is an after-school club for middle schoolers that uses storytelling and creative expression to explore questions around race and identity. And so the goals that we had for our experience together was really to build critical consciousness and racial literacy skills. So not only were we creating a space that was affirming and we wanted to connect with our culture, but we wanted to be critical. We wanted to think about the ways that we see the world and the ways that we can navigate through these systems. So it wasn't just like, hey, we feel great. Like, let's think and be intentional about these conversations. We also wanted to develop their leadership and their sense of agency so that they could express themselves and feel not judged for their opinions or their beliefs. And we really also wanted to intentionally make sure we were disrupting anti-Blackness and honest conversations about colorism and how do we center more Black experiences as we're talking about what it means to be Latino or Dominican. And so those were the things that we set out to do together. So after school, that was our opportunity space to make sure that we could connect and explore together. And we wanted to make sure that we could give that opportunity to young people and make it as accessible as possible. So we made sure we had stipends, that young people had supplies, that when they showed up, everything was there that they needed and that they could access. And so here's a roadmap. We spent some weeks thinking about community, building community and understanding and shared learning, and then moving towards sharing our own stories. And Cardi B's on the slide because we all know coronavirus is happening. And so here are the 19 students who journeyed for 7 weeks. And it was an incredible group of young people. Here we are building our identity maps and exploring who we are and talking more further about race. And so young people really reflecting on what it means to be Latino or folks of color and what those experiences are. And so we also took some time to acknowledge what the impact is on communities of color around COVID-19, knowing that Washington Heights and other neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan and throughout New York City were being deeply impacted, right? And that this actually does speak a lot to the ways that racism shows up in our society. So really making space to hold emotions and conversations around the current present moment. And so young people left Youth Action Lab feeling more aware of how race impacts not only them, but their world, and feeling more knowledgeable about their culture and where they come from. And so the future of Youth Action Lab is a little jumbled. We're still figuring it out. And so I asked young people to dream up with me what that could look like for them. And so it was really inspiring to see them feel a sense of ownership about Youth Action Lab having its own merchandise and having an outreach team that could go out to different schools and really reach the world. And I love this, that like when young people can build community and bond with each other and get to know each other, that means a lot. And so that was really cool. So it takes a village, y'all. I could not have done this alone. So just feeling in deep gratitude for all the young people who joined me online, who trusted me with this project and introduced me to their families. And for Amber for being a rock star teacher, and to all the Wheel staff, to Molly and the College Access team, to Ms. Pichardo. Thank you for letting me in and just being a part of such a wonderful community. And so thank you to all my DSI folks, to my thesis advisor, Jeff, to my my core team, Andrea and all the folks, to my teachers, Genesis, Chelsea for posting flyers, Wendy and my iTag group, Jomaida for giving me all of her amazing resources, and just grateful to all the other Black scholars who have spent some time thinking about this. And so thank y'all for listening, and I hope to hear from you.